Hi and hello watch fans, and welcome to another edition of the Real Time Show with me, your friendly neighborhood Jew, Alon Joseph, and your friendly neighborhood watchmaker, Rob Nuds. We have a new record, the biggest quantity of guests on one episode, because we managed to get the magic trio together on the same time in the virtual studio. And who am I talking about? They are the inventors of No Brutalist. I'm talking about Kollokium. We have in the studio with us today three veterans: Manuel Emch, although people call him Manuel Emch, Barth, Nussbaumer, and Sindi. Welcome, gentlemen.
Happy to join you, Alon and Rob, on this pretty interesting podcast, 5-hand podcast or 10 hands podcast.
It's going to be a challenge to edit, that's for sure, but I'm looking forward to it because we've got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, and I'm going to leave Alon in charge of the mic while we find out a little bit more about your backgrounds.
We're going to do this, I suggest, alphabetical. So I've known Manuel actually from his time at Swatch Group, doing Rado, Jacques d'Or, then moved on to Romain Jérôme. Now he's doing so much, and we actually work on some projects together. So I'll give him the honor soon. But Nussbaumer is actually a guy that's finally stepping out of the shadows a bit. Legendary designer. So I hope you will share all the design projects you've worked on and that you can talk about besides Kollokium. And Amma is the king of purple. And if you still don't know what I'm talking about, he is the horophile, one of the first and maybe best, I hate the word, but unfortunately it's used, watch influencers. But he's definitely not a shallow influencer. He is a designer. He's a trendsetter. So, in alphabetical order, please, Manuel, then Barth, then Amar, do your intros. Tell us who you are, why you love watches, and what your background is. And Rob and I will shut up and sit back.
Okay, well, as I'm allowed to start, I'm trying to keep it short because it starts to get a bit long, my resume in this watch industry. I'm actually born into this industry. I was born and raised in a city called Grenchen, which for some people might know, one of the centers of watchmaking is where ETA, the movement producer, Breitling, and a few other companies have their headquarters, is one of the major cities, not much talked about, of watchmaking. And my family has been in this industry, over generations. And well, I tried to run away from it, but eventually got caught by the virus again. Started pretty young, actually, at the age of 28 in the watch industry with a quick fix at Rado, which I tried to change a bit the philosophy, but not that successfully. And then I was lucky enough to be at the right time at the right place. And I could take over Jacques d'Or, which was back then just acquired by the Swatch Group. It was basically acquired as a name to avoid also that competition moves in. But there wasn't really a strategy for it. And I built the whole strategy for the brand, together with the person who did the due diligence back then. And I went to see late Mr. Hayek, and I said, look, I would like to take care of this brand. I know this brand. There is no real strategy. Nobody really knows where it's going. And eventually I seemed to be convincing enough to have who, allowed me to take this challenge on. Built this company from a two-person, me and a watchmaker, back then into quite a big company. Remember, we started at 200,000 euros turnover, Swiss francs or dollars, all the same nowadays. And we built it up to quite a substantial high-end watch company, designing the whole identity together with Barth, by the way. But I guess he'll come back to this later on. I left it in end of 2009 when we reached, what was back then, close to 40 million turnover. I think it was a very, very interesting. And within this few years in Swatch Group, I also was joined the extended management board. was in charge of all Eastern Europe, 27 countries, and established a subsidiary in Russia. Then decided for personal reasons that there was time to move a bit more into independence, took over RJ, transformed a little bit the business model from, say, negative provocation into something a bit more positive. Initiated all these projects with, call it generational icons, video games, Super Mario, Space Invaders, Batman, all these things that I think to a certain extent we see today in a few other brands. Also, again, with Barth. And then decided after a few years that I want to be by myself. I want to do my own stuff. I don't want to necessarily just work for others. Build my first consulting company in 2016, and started working for different companies. One of them that today I would say is a bit the most visible was Louis Erard, which I would say took in a bit difficult situation back in 2019, over-distributed, unclear product strategy, losing a substantial amount of money into, I think, quite an interesting and very looked after and mid-price watch brand. Work with few other brands. If I line them up, it's going to be a bit too long. Anyway, but going from, let's say, 1,000 to 1 million price range, from pretty volume-oriented brands into very, very niche high-end watch brands. Pretty all over the continents, working in Europe, I work in the Middle East, I work in Asia, I work in Eastern Europe, so in different price segments. Yeah, I think that's a bit the thing. And since Barth will take over from me in the talk, I will just mention, and I think it's important, that I've been working with Barth for 25 years now. We know each other for probably around 35 years, if not more. And I think this is also one of the elements of it. It's the deep friendship, the trust that we have into each other. And Amr, met Amr in 2008, right? Amr, 2008, 7 or 8. When he was back then still a very young gentleman, and actually bought one of my Jacques d'Or watches and in Lausanne. And we since then stay friends. And also I've been working with Amr over the years. And Kollokium, and I think this is the very interesting thing, is basically Amr and Barth challenging me to say, okay, we work with you for others. How about working with us for us? And that's the whole story basically started.
My name is Barth. It's actually Bartholomew in French. I grew up in Neuchâtel. When I was in age to start to learn a job, I wanted to create objects. So jewelry was kind of logical. So I went to art school in La Chaux-de-Fonds to learn jewelry designing and making. And very quickly I realized that actually making was not so much my thing, but I love to create. And during the 4 years of learning process, we had a year where we had to make a watch case, and I was really struck by the concept, and I really loved the idea of then I had to make it, but I think that was the first time I was enjoying making something with my hands. And I realized it's also designing jewelry is also a job. So, and you can live out of it. So I decided that's what I want to do. And I come from a family which is very creative and art and object oriented. My father is a collector of Art Nouveau, Art Deco. So I really grew up surrounded with objects. I have a huge background into objects. I've seen billions of things passing between my hands, and for example, if I go to Art Basel, I'm more interested into the furniture which is presented than the paintings. And so when I got out of school, I was training for a while, and then I first worked for the guy called Rodolphe Catin, who was making Rodolphe by Longines, which was quite famous in the, let's say, late 80s, early 90s. Then I worked in Milan in a studio where we were doing 100% of Vacheron Constantin, 100% of Raymond Weil. And then in 96, with the great age of 24, I was like, now it's time to be freelance. I did not know anything, but I was not designed to be an employee. So I decided, let's start slow and let's start small. So I was for many years by myself, and I started to work very quickly. I was very lucky to work for Calvin Klein. So this gave me a huge visibility. Then I worked a lot for Tag Heuer from 98, and I did many things for Tag from 98 to 2003, 4, 5. And then, of course, I started the adventure with Manuel for Jacques Hérault. And many brands. I have probably worked for 80 brands today. And as diverse as it's possible to be. So today I work for Petermann Beda. I have worked in the past for HYT. I have done everything for Maurice Lacroix for approximately 15 years. Of course, Romain Jérôme, as Emmanuel mentioned. David Yurman in the US, H. Stern in Brazil, Raqueta in Russia, Ball at the time in Hong Kong, and many other things I'm forgetting now. And of course, a lot of Louis Vuitton, a lot of Dior. So many things, but always as a ghost designer. So it's kind of one of the first time I am in front line with my project and not working for others. So in a very, very short summary, that's what I am doing. So I have, and the type of project I cover is 80% watches, a little bit of jewelry, and a little bit of packaging, displays, booth, and boutiques, and elements surrounding or collaterals to the industry.
So I think I'm out of you three, I'm probably the outsider to the industry somehow, because even though the watch industry is all I've ever known professionally, I still kind of feel like an outsider. So yeah, I originally wanted to be a doctor, nothing to do with watchmaking, but then last year or two of high school, I had a bit too much fun. So I ended up studying business instead. Really wasn't my passion, but at the same time, I was top of my class, so not too bad. And yeah, once I graduated, I wanted to continue living in Switzerland because I'm originally from Saudi Arabia, but I've lived in Switzerland since I was 12. And as a young business school graduate in Switzerland, you actually don't have, you have quite a bit of choice, but it's either in finance or one of the big multinationals, which really didn't speak to me. I'm not a very corporate-oriented person. So then I thought about, what do I actually like? What would I like to do? And I've always had a thing for watches. Ever since I was young, I used to collect Swatch watches. Then it upgraded to G-Shocks. And then by the time I graduated university, I was really getting into watchmaking, and especially kind of niche watchmaking, because, of course, if you're coming up today as a collector and you're seeing things on Instagram, it's very different. I think you have a lot more variety at your disposal. Whereas when I got into it in 2006, you had one or two kind of watch forums where all the action would happen. And very quickly, I discovered the world of independent watchmaking. So creators like Stéphane Sarfaneva, De Bethune at that time even, Haute-Lance, MBNF was just starting back then, Urwerk. And I never even knew that it was possible to have watches that don't really look like watches. So it really became an obsession. But yeah, I was just fiddling online, going on forums, posting things, looking at things, trying to learn more. And then, again, I still wanted to keep living in Switzerland. So it was time to look for a job. And some of my activity on the forums caught the attention of someone that goes by the name of Jean-Claude Beaver. You might have heard of him. And he offered me a job at Hublot to be what I reckon is actually the first kind of social media manager in the watch industry. We called it a community manager back then, but I was in charge of taking care of a lot of the end customers and collectors, relaying information on forums, also acting as a front for, I guess, after sales service, but as a first access to some of these collectors. And it was really quite an experience. I joined Hublot sort of unofficially because I had no work permit, but let's not tell the Swiss government that, in 2007. So it was still a family-owned brand. We were about actually just under 40 employees, including the watchmakers, administration, marketing, sales, and everything. And by the time I quit in 2012, it was an LVMH-owned brand, about 300 employees just in Switzerland. So it was honestly, I think, the experience of a lifetime, just being able to be there for, I think, probably one of the top 3 biggest success stories in high-end watchmaking in the last 2 decades. And it was a great experience. But again, as a watch lover, I think it's both a blessing and a curse to kind of work in the industry because, you know, once you see how the sausage is made, it's it's a little bit different. But the passion was always there. So in 2012, I decided, okay, working for one brand is not for me. And I had already started collecting years before that. And that's actually how I met Manuel. Emch. One of the first watches I ever bought myself was a Jacques Dro. And I remember placing my order at the local, well, it's called Tourbillon. It's like a Swatch Group owned multi-brand boutique. So they have basically just their own brands. And there was this piece that came out, I think it was Basel World 2017. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Manuel. And it was 2007, sorry, yeah, 2007. I'm getting old. 2007, wow. So it was actually the first ceramic jacket piece that Jacques Dro does, but it was also, I think, at the time, one of, if not the only watch with an absolutely black Grand Feu enamel dial. And I just really fell in love with that piece. And Jacques Dro was, I guess even today, they're still only doing very, very small editions. And, you know, back then, 88 pieces really sounded like nothing and probably still is nothing. And I immediately placed my order at that boutique. And then I think just before Christmas time, they had organized a little event where some of the Swatch Group CEOs were there. And I was really excited to meet Manuel Emch because he was one of the few CEOs at that time who was actually active on some of these watch forums. And just his whole approach was I mean, to a younger collector like myself back then, was very fresh, very different, and also very approachable, which I think is something a lot of watch brands and CEOs are just starting to learn now with social media. But Manuel, being Manuel, kind of always ahead of the curve. And we really just hit it off. And I've always stayed in touch with him. I've followed all his other projects. Romain Jerome, I was a big fan. Louis Erard now, I mean, I think a good third of my watch box now is stuff that Manuel and Barth have done. And the funny thing is, Barth is so modest that a lot of the watches that I've either owned or have loved to own, or even today would like to go back and buy, were actually designed by Barth, but I had no idea because he's a bit too modest for his own good. But it's been quite an adventure. So after Hublot, I decided, a bit like Manuel, to start my own agency. I still did a couple of things for some of the big group brands like Hublot, but my real interest was in trying to help develop some of these independent brands, especially from a communication point of view. I felt like a lot of them were doing good work, but they were getting no visibility because they just don't know how to communicate properly. So I started working with quite a few brands who, I mean, if I can give an example, like H. Moser and Company was one where I've been involved for about 10 years now. And again, I like being at brands when it's kind of that turnaround phase when, okay, there's a bit of substance. What do we do with it? How do we get it out there? And I work with a few other independent brands as well. I'm maybe not going to list them for confidentiality's sake. But it's been a great experience. But again, being a watch collector and working in the industry is not always what it's cut out to be, because you as a collector, you have a certain view of things. It might not even be what the majority of the market actually feels, but you as a hardcore kind of guy, you might eventually end up dissatisfied with the way things are run, the way things are done, and especially the way I think products are approached in general, where a lot of it is often very reactionary. And given how the watch industry works, the amount of time it takes any brand, I think, to react to changes in the market, changes in people's preferences, it's usually a few years. And just after a while, honestly, it just became a bit frustrating of, not seeing things done the way I'd like them to be done. And so I think 2020 came. Of course, the whole world was locked down. And after having worked kind of independently for, at that point, I think 6 or 7 years, I spoke to Manuel because I know if anyone knows how to do it, it's him. Like, we've helped a lot of brands turn around, kind of given them an identity as well. But I think between the two of us, we have a lot of ideas. Some of them kind of very unorthodox to watchmaking. I think the three of us were all into design in general, and I always felt that there's a real gap in the industry somehow, just in terms of like pure design. And you find a lot more interesting stuff in the very, very high end segment, but then in the more kind of affordable luxury level, it's usually things that are very kind of subdued, but very, good watches, not very conservative. I mean, it is Switzerland, so very conservative. And at the same time, like there's no real daringness. It's either things that are inspired by what came, 40, 50, 80 years ago, or trying to do something that's, pleasing as many people as possible. And really wanted to do something edgy because as a watch lover, I mean, I have to admit, for me, it's always design that comes first. You can have the best complications, the nicest hand finishing and whatever. But for me, if the design's not there, then the rest honestly doesn't matter. And at the same time, I'm someone who's, I don't know, I make strange associations sometimes. So I can see a watch that's almost classical, but it'll remind me of like a movie or a building or a video game or something completely abstract. And so, yeah, I told Manuel, look, it's now or never. I think the time to do something. He's like, well, let me talk to someone I've also worked with for a lot of years, who's Barth Nussbaumer, because he's also been kind of haggling me to do something. So maybe we can do something together. And 4 years later, this is where we're at.
And actually, by the way, I think we have to. This is pretty an interesting thing. Our very first meeting ended before it actually ever started, right? So indeed, both of them have been talking to me about this, the desire to do something, not just for others, but also for themselves, for us. And I said, okay, makes sense. I think I'm in for it. And we were supposed to meet, I think it was February 2020, right? Is that about right? I guess so. At my place. So they were training in. It was obviously COVID period. They were training in. The moment they stepped into my place, the same moment I got a phone call from the health, Swiss Health Organization, whatever, to tell me that I had COVID and that I had to to basically go into quarantine and not talk or touch anybody close. So that was a pretty fun start into the project, I must say. And not for me, obviously, and not for you too, but it's quite interesting that we started with this.
And that's the beauty of the watch industry. It's filled with beautiful stories, memories, and friendships and relationships. So good segue for me to share an anecdote about Kollokium. I remember vividly seeing the prototype, and I, as you, Manuel, born into the industry, rarely fall off my chair that something really grabs me or makes me fall in love or gets me flabbergasted, but Kollokium did. I walked into our first ever meeting at Geneva Watch Days 23 in Geneva, August, at Haute-Lance, walking into the suite. I see Amma with our mutual buddy, Romaric, hugs, hey, what's up? And then I just stopped talking because I saw Ammar's wrist. So I immediately pulled it off his wrist. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I was blown away. So he started laughing. He's like, Alon, I know you're going to grab your phone. Don't shoot it. I'm like, okay. I said, dude, I don't know what this is, but I need one. He's like, wait with this. He has this tranquility over him. So he's relaxed, laughing. He's always smiling. So it made me fall head over heels. For our dear listeners that have not encountered Kollokium online or real life, it's really something new. If you have to do something by the power of association, it reminded me of my fond youth memories from the 80s of a pin art board. So that's the first vibe it gave me. But it's a new case design. The glass is different. But you guys are definitely going to tell us the whole philosophy and strategy behind it. To give the mic back to you, gentlemen, Kollokium is spelled Kollokium. That gives me a reminiscence of the Latin word of colloquium, which is spelled with a C and a Q, which for me is an academic meeting.
That's it. Totally right. That's the exact idea of the name.
Okay, so walk us through the name, the design philosophy, and you guys write that you're adamantly not a brand. So walk us through that, please.
Okay, I'll take care of the name. Then I'll let Barth talk about the design. And obviously, if that's okay for everyone, Amer, I'll let you finish it up with the idea of we're not a brand. So Kollokium, actually, we were looking and one goes back to what Amer will say at the end. We're not in an idea of, and we're still not in an idea of building a brand. We just wanted to do a project for us, for first and foremost. A project that represents us, that represents our sensitivities, which are pretty shared. I must say, we have the same kind of, I would say, call it mood boards, if you want to simplify, but we have similar tastes for art, design, architecture, music, clubs. There's a lot of elements that we share, and that's why also this kind of brutalist logic was there. And there's also a lot of things that we have always wanted to do, but never somehow could do for any of our clients or brands that we worked with or for. And then Kollokium, basically we're sitting between Lausanne and Zurich. Me and Barth are both Zurich. We surprisingly speak French between us, but we feel more Swiss German in our mentalities. And we wanted to have something that was a bit Germanized, a bit away from the usual Latin and Geneva and French driven philosophies. And we were looking for something that was just basically this idea of gathering, of friends gathering. We initially started with the idea of collective, which then was a bit too generic. Or we liked the K somehow, and Kollokium made sense for us, and then we just Germanized, if you want, this Latin word, and a word that doesn't exist, but somehow it's Kollokium spelled by Germans, but it really represents this. It's a kind of friends, scientific people, specialists. Whatever you can call it, but basically it's a gathering of people who share ideas, philosophies, who challenge each other, and this is how it all started. And the name really represents this kind of physical element where we are sitting, we're talking, we're debating, we're sharing.
And I think it's more the meaning of the word that struck us than the name, the word itself.
Yeah, it's really almost like an academic debate between, I don't know if you can say colleagues or, specialists.
That's what I think is very, very particular in our, let's say, trium. We are very complementary to each other. We all have our fields of expertise, different elements. But at the same time, we all interconnect, we all intersection. And this intersection is where the things are happening, because again, we have this core or this center or this intersection that we all deeply share. And it goes really through all sorts of fields, and definitely not just watchmaking. And I would even say watchmaking probably comes least or last. And it's more about music, it's more about architecture, it's more about design, it's more about art than anything else.
Yeah, and I would add also the will of we really wanted to have something fresh. I think that was one of the most important things from the beginning. the idea was definitely not to take any inspiration from the industry we know so well, and more trying to get inspiration from somewhere else and try to combine things, which at the end looks like a watch that has been designed by professional, but is totally different from A to Z. And you are talking about the casting. That's really one of the reasons of the casting is because I have been told in the industry though, oh, we are too precious to use casting. Casting is not good enough for us. And casting, the great thing, it allows us to make, for example, the lettering on the side of the watch case possible and easily possible. And it's at the end, it's much cleaner than I think we all thought it's going to be clean. And it looks really great. And we kind of kept it untouched. So it's just a little bit sandblast for cleaning. But it's really kind of raw from the mold. And that was, I think, very important for all of us to also bring something slightly different, but in terms of manufacturing, because jewelry is reusing that since ever. But for a reason which I don't understand, nobody in the industry used that, because it allows to make a very specific volumes that you would be a nightmare to mill, for example. But it's great. It gives us great opportunities for different variations.
Can I just ask on that subject, Bart? I'm really interested in the casting, and we'll get back to the brand that isn't a brand concept with Amma shortly. But this casting process, can you describe it to us exactly? Like what is happening as opposed to CNC milling? I'm sure everybody is familiar with that. But firstly, what happens, and why do you think so few brands will touch it? Is it a prestige thing that they associate with it, or do they just not see the potential?
So the basic reason is, theoretically, casting is not the density of the material is not equals everywhere. So if you want to polish your watch or have a very clean sun brushing, for example, you might have some little asperity or little bubbles that might appear. So it might cause problem. But that's one of the reasons the watch industry is not using it. And to describe the process is actually quite simple. It's you make in wax. You make in wax. It's not printed. It's really already molded. So you have to make a first mold to be able to make the wax. Then the wax is attached to a tree. So and this everything is made out of wax. It's quite difficult to explain without showing my hands. So you have to imagine that you have a tree made out of wax with a little watch case which are attached to the same trunk. And this whole tree of wax is after put into gyps, I think it's called in English, plâtre in French. And when you have your tree of wax in the gyps, you put everything in a machine, and in this machine you have the stainless steel is melted, and the machine is rotating. And when the stainless steel is totally melted, you send it into this rotating machine, and the stainless steel is actually burning the wax. The wax disappear and is replaced by the metal. And then you just have to, between brackets, cut the watch case and finish them.
It sounds simple. It's not as simple as this. And Rob, believe me, the watch industry wasn't using it, but I'm sure we'll start to see quite a lot of this coming up in the future.
Were you testing it in 3D printing as well, or is that not viable yet in this material for you guys?
For us, it was not interesting to do 3D printing.
We think the technology is great, but is not very clean yet. It's still very often you see the layers of the printing, and it's really rough, and the casting is just in between the classic milling or stamping and the 3D printing. I think for me it's much more interesting.
I had no idea that every case starts life as a wax version of itself and then it's replaced by the molten steel. That is incredible. I'd never realized that was part of the process. I suppose that one of the reasons why many brands, in addition to the slight inconsistencies in casting that you mentioned, might not choose to use it is that they don't feel that aesthetically it fits with what they're trying to achieve. But you've been very clever. Obviously, your shared experience in watch design and bringing projects to life has informed your ability to do this, but you've designed the watch with the material process in mind so that every component can be made. I mean, that's clever in my mind. That's not like, oh, we've got an idea for a design and then we're going to make it like this. It's a whole holistic process.
No. Yeah, it's a consequence. I think casting was the starting point, and then I designed something that also makes only sense if you don't plan to brush and polish the object. All these concave surfaces are you can't brush them, so they make sense because it's made out of casting, and it also makes sense because we wanted something that gives the feeling that it's a piece of industrial metal which has been either stamped or casted, but it's really a consequence. The casting was first, and then I designed around the idea of the technique. Totally.
That was, I think, the very, very important thing. We stripped off any convention, any idea, any logic. We basically took the whole idea of what we want to do from scratch, and not from we want to be like this or we want to do like that. We really took all our inspiration basically outside of the watch industry. I mean, at the end of the day, the only thing that we kept was obviously there has to be a movement inside, but that was a fundamental part of the whole process, is to build something out of something totally new and out of something existing.
Yeah, I think philosophically it made sense for us because, again, looking at prices in the same or a similar price segment as us, it's usually trying to emulate or look like a higher end watch. So it's almost like you're trying to pass off the thing as if the entire thing was finished by hand and made by hand, when, I mean, we clearly know it's not. Even, the polishing on cases or the brushing, that's usually done by machines. Whether collectors know that or not, that's another question. But for us, it's more like, okay, but why are we trying to hide the fact that, machines do a lot of the work? Like we're actually proud of this more industrial aspect of the watch, and we really want to put it right in your face. And I think this idea of cast steel was really there from the beginning. And Barth, it's something he really wanted to do for a long time. We had our doubts in the beginning, and honestly, it was probably the most complex part of the entire watch to get right. The one we went through the most prototypes with, I think, is actually the case. Because again, you're doing it in injection, and I think by definition, doing it in die cast means imprecision to an extent. And that's probably also why a lot of watch brands tend to avoid it, because you don't get to that micron level precision with injection. But that's precisely what we love about it. And there's also, I think, an aesthetic value to it, because if you get a piece of steel and you mill it with a CNC and get your case shape, and then you try to sandblast it or bead blast it, you will not have the same visual effect. And it's not just visual. I think there's also an ergonomic aspect to it, where if you touch one of our cases, in spite of all those seemingly sharp lines and kind of concave surfaces, it's all actually super soft to the touch because it's injected. So the edges are very slightly rounded off. So there's nothing sharp on it, even though visually it looks quite sharp. And yeah, we just thought it made sense. And I can't imagine doing this watch in any other way.
I think what's really nice about the aesthetic with those slightly rounded edges, as you say, when you normally have a watch that's been finished either by hand or by machine, and you get rounded edges through, shall we say, a slight inaccuracy of that process, that looks terrible. But the consistency of the rounding of the edges that's achieved through this process makes it feel as if it's just emerged from thought, like it's just an idea that's been realized on the wrist. It doesn't have that extra invasive process that can damage the original concept. And I absolutely love that effect. I think that it's a genius process to go through to identify exactly how you want to make something and then design it within those limitations. And to have achieved it is, a stunning thing to have done. When it comes to the case construction, though, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, it looks like it's a 2-piece case with a crown, obviously. Is that correct? Or is there more protection for the movement inside the case? Or is it like a central barrel that sits into the case back and lugs that are all one piece? Tell us how it goes together.
So the movement is, of course, holded by a movement holder. And then you're right, it's a two pieces watch case. So the unusual thing is actually the case back is with the lugs. So the lugs are attached to the case back, and then you have what I would call the barrel, where the reference of the watch is visible. So it's actually really two cases. It's 2-piece cases. It's a slightly different way of building a watch case. But again, in here, it was completely making sense to build it that way. It's a technique I have used 2 times in my career, and sometimes it really makes sense to attach the lugs to the case back.
So there's a gasket that sits in a recess on the lower portion of the case barrel.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Of course, yeah.
Okay, and then what about the crystal gasket? Because that crystal is incredible. It's so tall on the sides. I mean, was that a difficult component to develop itself to ensure water resistance?
It's actually, there is no gasket. It's glued.
Oh.
The sapphire is glued, yeah.
Okay, that's how you did it. I wondered how you got that like incredible transition from case to crystal, given the height of the crystal.
We had debate with the manufacturer about that, but it was the best solution. So if you have a watch in your hands, you see that there is a little what we call metallization at the bottom of the glass, a little mirror effect, and under it's glued. But you have actually 2 techniques. It's a gasket or you glue it. So for example, I made H0 and H20 for HYT, and in both cases the glass was glued.
Actually, Barth, we took the similar technique from what Barth designed for HYT back then, which I think is still the best product they had in the collection.
I think definitely for me, as far as case designs go, that was probably one of the most interesting contemporary cases, just the whole H0 with that. What Barth likes to call a cloche à fromage. So I guess glass cheese bell. But I love it. And it's something actually I included in our very early mood boards, I think the first time we met. And I had no idea that Barth was the guy who designed it. But I've always found, I mean, forget the watch itself, but just as it designed this case with this giant kind of proper glass box, not just like a slightly domed or slightly protruding sapphire crystal, but there, you have a case back and a sapphire and you see everything. And yeah, as weird as it sounds, the glue technique is actually more common than people realize, especially when you get into these very particular sapphire shapes.
Yeah, and people in the public tend to forget that, for example, wings on a plane are glued. So it's a very, and also bridges are glued. So it's really a good technique to hold the glass on a watch case.
Yeah, and it's not like some Yoo-hoo, glue for kids or something. It's not gonna you can't just pop it off like that easily.
Yeah, so. It's very good, and it's very commonly used in very, let's say, architectured high-end watch pieces. I mean, we're talking about H0 from HYT, but further up the price ladder, you'll find a lot of these things, and we're obviously not going to name them. because that's their decision to communicate about it or not. But it's actually, to frankly speaking, sometimes a much better option than a gasket.
Going from the case and the glass, I want to please focus on the dial. So the philosophy of I would call it a 3D effect. I refer to pin art, but a more modern approach would be a city landscape seen from a bird eye view. So that's also what it reminds me of, skyscrapers seen from above. I believe I've read somewhere that you've had Superluminova help you from day one.
So I think if you look at like our very early mood boards, and Manuel and Barth tend to make fun of me for this, but I'm kind of the loom guy. Every time we talk about the product, the only thing I ask about is the loom.
Yes,
but for me, it is an important factor because a lot of my favorite watches that I own, it's often about the Luminova, and I think it's a very like geeky detail, this kind of glow in the dark effect. But I think it's usually used as more of a functional element, whereas we wanted to do something that it does serve a purpose, but it's really more of an aesthetic decision.
Decorative.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the pin art board because honestly, until people told us, that was not at all the inspiration.
It was not. Yeah, it was not.
It was never in our mood boards, but what was from day one, when we talked about dial, what was very, very important, obviously, hammer and the loom, or the loom hammer, whatever we can say it. But I think what was really fundamentally important was a lot of three-dimensionality. A lot of depths, a lot of heights, and this has and this kind of city life, let's call it LA, could call it Berlin. It doesn't matter that much which city it is, but we wanted to feel that kind of city life in the watch and a lot of dimensionality. These were very two fundamental aspects of our mood boards.
Yeah, and honestly, I think also like creating something that's almost, I would almost say cinematic, because one of the big inspirations visually, at least for me, was Blade Runner, both the original and 2049. And it's true that this kind of almost dystopic city, high-rise buildings, this kind of eerie orange glow or blue glow in our case, very cold. It just, it's very evocative. And I think that's also why we say like we're not a brand, it's a project, because we just want to keep being experimental. And we don't want to get too locked down on one design or one idea and then get bogged down with how do we produce more of this? How do we make it more efficient to produce or whatever? It's not really in our logic. And I think really just trying to push, especially on the design side. And we say we're not watchmakers. We're quite, I'd say, almost proud of that because, it's two very different jobs, to be a designer or to be a watchmaker. And yeah, this whole idea of a project, I think, just makes sense because we were really trying to do things in a different approach. I don't think we've even once spoken about eventually doing some kind of ad campaign or anything like that. Even for the first two pieces we launched, so the Friends and Family, which, I mean, for people that didn't know about it, it just came out of nowhere. These all went to people that, a bit like you, Alon, they saw it during one of the watch shows, or whether it's Geneva Watch Days. And I mean, we only had working watches in November, and I was walking around basically with a watch that's actually just a bracelet with no movement for a few months, and it got people's attention. And we never did an actual press release. We don't have any PR or anything like that. So it's just, keep things small, keep things humble as well, but keep pushing the envelope. I think that's really this idea of project rather than a brand.
So this idea that it's not a brand, that it's a platform for creativity for you three to explore the things that have always interested you and maybe not been given the opportunity to explore them with other brands, or, now want the unbridled free reign to do exactly what you want, suggests that when it comes to aesthetic homogeny from Kollokium, it's not something we should expect. We should expect novelty every single time. So are you planning? I mean, I guess you have ideas for what you're going to do in the future. Will what comes next be anything like Project One, or will it be completely different and united only by an ideology rather than an aesthetic code?
It's actually a very good question. It depends on how you look at it. I mean, we obviously have a few, I would say, pieces, directions, ideas that we want to continue working on. Die-cast is one of them, definitely. Three-dimensionality is one of them. This kind of, overall very sapphire element. So there are a few, I wouldn't say identities, but ideas that we're going to pursue. Because again, I mean, we the idea was not to make one model and then just roll it out and do it over and over again, because I don't think it's any interest for us, because we, again, don't see this in the traditional way. But there are pieces, directions, ideas that we actually pretty excited with, that we also learned with Project One, that we could actually push further, to be more daring, to innovate even more, and not just aesthetically or from design perspective, but also in terms of evolution, in terms of elements or designs or know-hows.
Do you intend at all on attacking the more well-trodden tropes of watchmaking and conceiving your interpretation of, for example, a dive watch or a field watch or a pilot's watch or a dress watch? Or is the platform's long-term goal to subvert through absolute novelty and to just go off-piste as far as the rest of the industry is concerned?
I think that's kind of what we're trying to avoid, actually.
Yeah, that's what exactly I was wanting to say. I mean, we don't have a roadmap, let's say it this way. We have ideas. We have, call it desires. We have, we want to continue in this kind of idea, and we want to do it organically. One thing leads to the other. And we don't want to set this kind of roadmap to say, okay, let's venture into let's say all the usual suspects. Let's venture into different types of movements. Let's venture into different price points. All these things that I don't know how it will look like when we look back in 10, 20 or 30 years. I don't know. But the fact is that this is not the roadmap. The roadmap is really, or the idea is really to just let's make a project based on what we would like to innovate, what we would like to try out, and then eventually there is a logic, and that's probably the interesting thing. There will be an identity, simply because we have pretty clear and shared visions on what we like. So this, I think, just because what we are will eventually reflect into what will come, and how it will fit into a logic.
So expect the unexpected, I guess, is what we should say to our listeners at this point.
Yeah, salary.
So the current piece was limited to 99 pieces, is that correct?
So we actually did a first friends and family kind of pre-series, which we honestly sold and delivered most of them before we even unveiled the project. So we did 99 pieces of those. That stands out, I guess, today with its orange hand and the orange emission loom, which was a good idea on paper. Not the brightest loom, I'll admit, but that's just chemistry. And then the new one we dropped just, when was it? On the 22nd of May. We did 199, and went a little bit faster than anticipated.
Well, that's always good to hear.
Yeah, yes and no. We wanted it to be fair, anticipating, telling people when the pieces are ready. Those interested, could click and go for it. But we underestimated that there is a certain, let's say, unfair competition, in the sense that people have pre-registered all their datas or Apple Pay or whatever. And there was a lot of people who were actually trying to buy the watch and had it registering in the checkout, and by the time they actually clicked to pay for it, it was all gone, because we obviously couldn't anticipate that there will be that much, or let's say we were not expecting that much of people wanting the product, and we didn't think that there is a certain unfairness if you're better prepared than others. And we take this into consideration, because and this is something that's fundamental for us too. I mean, we're not here to give lessons. We're here to make things that we enjoy, share them, and also have a fair return on things that we can improve in many things. Because we for us, being close to our friends and families, and we call this first edition Friends and Family and Fools, by the way. But we want to be close to the people who like what we do.
So I'm curious as to whether the chosen limitation numbers had anything at all to do with the manufacturing process itself. When I first saw the diecast concept, I was wondering, okay, is that cost effective at a small run size versus CNC machining, or is it very expensive and therefore you wanted to put a cap on it so that you didn't go too far and provide yourself with too many QC concerns, shall we say, further down the line? Or was it a number that you just settled upon thinking, okay, this is a nice balance, it's a good value piece, CM and we sell?
It was actually, a reality, because the molds are pretty expensive. There's a lot of R&D involved. It looks, and as Barth mentioned, it sounds actually quite evident, but when it comes to doing it, it's not that much. It's not that evident, because it's also a new venture. It's also a new, it's a lot of things that haven't been tried in the watchmaking industry, and it took us quite some time, energy, and obviously also a few bucks to develop this. And 300 was a bit of a critical number, just to at least cover our initial run, because again, for us, the initial idea was not that, there's no commercial logic to it. We just wanted to do a project that we enjoy, but at the end of the day, if at least we don't lose money on it, that would be helpful. And this is why we choose this number, because it was the number where we basically had our we basically get to that, call it black zero or red zero, whatever. Look at which side you look at it.
Yeah, and honestly, Rob, the thing is, and I hope people really take this message to heart, is that, when we started this project 4 years ago, we knew we were doing something that's super niche, very unusual. And honestly, when you look at the kind of watch landscape, whether it was 4 years ago, but even today, what people tend to prefer is, I guess, also sometimes a bit more conservative. People like their Breguet numerals, they like their whatever hands and nice teardrop lugs. So for us, honestly, we didn't know what kind of appeal this kind of watch could possibly have. So, if you ask us a year ago, 300 watches was actually a big number. We weren't, and of course it's easy hindsight 2020, but we really didn't know if we could sell all those pieces at the time. So it was a risk, but it was a risk we wanted to take on ourselves. If we were thinking like a brand, then we probably would have done something like a more public crowdfunding campaign or some kind of open order. But then, we'll take our time to actually make the watches and deliver them to you. And that's something that I think philosophically we'd really rather avoid. We'd rather only sell what we've already made, what we can deliver, and not just jump on the opportunity. And again, I think if we start committing to like much bigger series and things like that in the future, it means we start becoming more like a brand where we're just focusing on making a production more efficient, working out the actual structure of a company and stuff. Whereas today we have no real structure. Honestly, we all live in different parts.
It's still a night project.
Yeah,
for all of us.
But actually, having said this, and this is quite an interesting remark. We just founded the company, I think pretty much 2 weeks before we actually did the first launch, the commercial launch, and we actually struggled with the bank account because we all live in pretty much different places. I travel a lot, so it's not been always easy to coordinate. It's not, the world is not as digital as one would believe, especially if it comes to creating companies.
Especially in Switzerland, they love their paperwork.
They love the paperwork, and if they want to look at you when you sign the paper. So it is what it is anyway. And I think we just got the bank account like a day before we actually, and all this was, it just came very organically, because it one led to the other, and the number has always been. Initially, it was just how to do a project and do it in a way that at least we're willing to invest a lot of time, energy, sweat and tears into it, but at least let's we just cover our costs, and that was the only, I would say, initial thought. And we didn't even have a company. We used mine for quite a time, and then we understood, maybe better that we have one. I mean, again, very organically.
A lot of improvisation.
Yeah, a lot of improvisation. It's true.
And honestly, beyond that, Rob, again, like I think this idea of making more, what people need to realize is, as kind of industrial and brutalist as the watch looks, there's actually a lot more handwork that goes into it than probably any other watch in this kind of segment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the dials alone, keep in mind, and this is no BS, but 468 markers, each of them is applied by hand, and then the tips are filled with Luminova by hand. So there's only so much we can make in a given time frame. And again, I'd rather like keep these things kind of limited and then explore other things, whether it's the same model or future models, just to keep coming out with new things and not get stuck on one reference or one model or one design.
Question for Manuel and Barth. How hard did Amma lobby for the first one to be purple?
To be orange?
You'd be surprised, Alon, actually, because I've done so much purple, and honestly, when I started doing purple, well, now over 10 years ago, I promise you not a single brand was doing a purple dial, not for men anyways. And nowadays, because it's become a bit more accepted and common, it kind of lost its pop for me a little bit to actually, okay, I'm the purple guy. I think, the big brands will never say that, not even the small ones. But I still love purple. We're not close to it, but honestly, it would have been too predictable to do something purple to start with. So,
as a Dutchman, I salute you for choosing orange, and the Real Time Show also has orange in it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a joy to hear the whole journey behind this project. We can't wait for Project with a K 2.
Yeah.
Jawohl.
And Rob, the honor is yours to do the outro. Before you do so, gentlemen, maybe shout out where you want our listeners to find all three of you, respectively, URLs or Insta handles or whatever.
I think we're pretty easy. We have we're very accessible people. Just DM us on our mutual Instagram accounts or on Kollokium account. Register if there's any interest on kollokium.com to be at least posted on what's coming. I think that's really worth it.
Regarding new releases, do you have a time frame in place for a follow-up, or is that still in the works?
No, we have. We have. We obviously felt that it's going to be a bit more than expected. We have another project, but and this is maybe also something that is very, very unusual in the way we tackle things. But the very first time when we had this watch on the wrist, remember, Alon, in Geneva Watch Days, I had one of my retailers on Louis Arard who came with clients, okay, trying to show them the new novelties, and all of them bought a Kollokium. Okay? So he looked at me a little bit desperate and saying, "Well, that wasn't the aim of the game." And I said, and then he bought also one for himself. And then I said, and I talked with Amr and Barth about it and said, look, it's interesting because in our friends and family edition, we had about 9 to be very precise, 9 or 10 retailers or people who have watch stores who bought from themselves. And we decided that we open up a small edition or a small part of the next edition to our 10 retailer friends. We don't want to, because I think it's just fair, and we also want this also a way for us and for me in particular to work with people and say thank you to people who have been supporting me, supporting my projects, and indirectly also Amr and Barth over the years.
Brilliant stuff. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. It was a real pleasure. And we are going to have to get you back on air sooner rather than later, because I had a big list of questions that I would have loved to get to, but unfortunately, you're just too interesting.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Alon, for having us. I mean, this is our first podcast together. I think even individually, we haven't done one yet. So we're really honored to be doing it with the Real Time Show, which has been really one of the preeminent, I think, watch podcasts out there. And yeah, keep up the great work, guys.
Very nice of you to say so. And if any of our listeners have any questions for the guys, then please do get in touch with us. You can either reach us via email, either Rob, Alon, or David at therealtime.show, or via our dedicated Instagram handle at therealtime.show. We'll be back soon with more top quality watch content. Until then, stay safe and keep on ticking.